You know this isn't good for you. You've tried to move on. You've told yourself 100 times that you deserve better, and then you go back anyway. Why? This isn't about you being weak or about having low standards or a lack of self-respect. We're not going to do that to ourselves because we know it doesn't help us very much. Shaming and berating ourselves is not the answer. Instead, we're going to talk about the deeper issues underneath this painful pattern, this urge to keep fighting for a relationship that clearly is not working. Because that drive, it didn't start here in this present moment. It was wired into your nervous system a very long time ago. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk about how trauma, attachment, and emotional dysregulation shape our relationships and our lives so that we can finally take control and live on our own terms. Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share, and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow, and I appreciate it so much. In this video, we're going to talk about why you keep going back to people who hurt you or to relationships you already know are not working, how your nervous system sets you up for emotional addiction, what self-abandonment really looks like, and how to finally break this pattern for good. When you go back to the same relationship that you've already left, and each time you leave it, you leave with more shame and less self-respect, then there has to come a point when you ask yourself how much love really has to do with it. And maybe this is exactly why you're watching this video, because today you arrived at this point. But if you know it's a bad idea, why do you keep doing it? Let's start by asking this question because you've probably asked it of yourself many times. Because I know that if you're watching this video, it's not because you think this is a good idea. You already know that this dynamic isn't working. You've probably already left and gone back, maybe only once, maybe multiple times. You might even be telling your friends how done you are with this whole thing, only to get pulled back in. And the thing is, your rational brain knows. Your higher thinking, logical brain, it gets it. Your friends see it and they tell you that this whole thing is bad news and it's going to keep ending the same way every time. Your family sees it. Heck, you probably agree with them. But the problem is that your rational brain is just one part of a much larger system. And that system includes your emotional brain, your attachment system, your nervous system, and your subconscious. All the parts of you that don't respond to logic and reason. These are the parts of you that respond to the music, the emotional soundtrack that plays in your mind every time you eat peppermint ice cream. Or you get a memory of the smell of the cologne your ex used to wear. Or you walk into a room that for some reason smells like your childhood. So when you're sitting there trying to convince yourself this is a bad idea, only a part of you is hearing it. The rest of you, the deeper parts, are in disagreement. So when you feel conflicted about your decision, it's because you really are in conflict with the other parts of you who want you to make a different decision. And it's this inner conflict that leads you to the same poor choice. You're also going back because the deeper layers of you, namely your nervous system, are chasing a reward. And it's not even the good parts you're chasing. You're chasing the relief you get when your ex chooses you momentarily all over again. When they text, when they say just the right thing that makes you feel good, when they pop back into your life out of nowhere and say they missed you, because it makes your brain light up with dopamine. Not because you feel truly fulfilled by any of this, by this pattern, but because those deeper parts of you, they're wired to respond to anticipation. That's what dopamine does. Dopamine is not the chemical of reward. It's the chemical of expecting the reward you'll get. And it's part of a much larger system that's in place to help you learn what to chase in life. And that's exactly how intermittent reinforcement works. The other person withholds their love and their attention. Then they give you just a little bit. Then they disappear again. Then they toss you another crumb of affection. And your brain rides on this wave. You become addicted to the highs and the lows of this cycle that keep you in a loop of hope, followed by disappointment, followed by just enough connection to keep you hooked and chasing. But dopamine doesn't mean love. Dopamine means that your brain thinks a reward is about to come your way. But what really makes all of this harder is that it ties into your old trauma patterns. That's why it feels more like a compulsion than a decision you're making. It's not something you've reasoned out logically, because if that were the case, it would be much easier to let go. It's not something you decide with your thinking brain. It's why you can tell yourself it's a bad idea in one breath and be ready to move your ex back in the next. Because what's really happening underneath the surface is that Present day you is in conversation with little you, and little you is not operating on the same wavelength. Little you lives in the body and is mostly unconscious. So underneath the surface, you're not really chasing this one particular person. What you're chasing is an old emotional wound that shaped your love blueprint right from the beginning. And this wound, this unfulfilled part of you, determined what love is supposed to look like and feel like all the way down to your body physically. And if you've been around this channel, you know the kind of impact childhood emotional wounds can have on us. How deeply and quietly they maneuver us and our choices, and how powerfully they can shape the way we behave throughout our entire lives. These wounds impact what kind of relationships we have, what kinds of jobs we have, whether our mental health is mostly good or predominantly difficult. So if you grew up with caregivers who didn't love you consistently, or who didn't love you enough, or who didn't love you in the way you needed to be loved when you were little, who weren't necessarily abusive, but perhaps ignored or minimized your emotional needs, well, your nervous system still had to do its job. It still had to learn what love was and take an imprint of that. And it learned based on that inadequate, inconsistent version of love it was offered. So little you walked away from your childhood believing that love has to be earned. That maybe it's never quite completely safe to love another person or to be loved by someone, that love is always a step away or just a little bit out of your reach. And now as an adult, you're magnetically and inexplicably drawn and magnetized to the people who make you feel in the exact same way. Not because you like the results you get, but because your nervous system recognizes it. And your nervous system always defaults to what feels familiar. It's not looking for what's good for you, it's looking for what it already knows. This is what's called repetition compulsion, and it's one of the strongest forces behind why we go back to painful relationships over and over again. Because even though your logical brain knows that this is a bad idea, there's a deeper part of you that believes, if I just try this one more time, if I can get this person to love me, then maybe I wasn't too much. Maybe I was lovable after all. And I know these are not things that you're saying to yourself out loud. You're not consciously thinking these words. And on some level, this is about validation. You want this person, your ex, to validate you because your self-worth is tied to it. So you can believe that who you are is enough. But the thing is that as long as you're waiting for someone else to do that, you stay stuck. Because what you're really missing isn't this other person's validation. You're missing your own validation. But until you learn to feed yourself that validation, it's hard to walk away because you have nothing to replace the other person's approval with. This is why you chase people and you keep going back to bad situations. Because if someone else is validating you, even inconsistently, you feel okay. And when that validation disappears, then you don't have your own love, your own approval, and your own sense of worth to stand on, the emptiness can be shockingly loud and uncomfortable. So you either have to go back to that person who was validating you in the first place, or you have to find someone new really fast. Because that hit of outside validation feels like the only thing that can quiet the pain of not having your own. This is why it's so tempting to bury one relationship with another when we're unhealed. A new string of hinge dates can do wonders in the moment, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. And now we get to the hardest part of this whole thing, the part that most of us really just don't want to look at. Self-abandonment. Because underneath all of the emotional logic, underneath the patterns, the trauma bonds, the triggers, there's something even deeper. There's the part of you that learned early on not to really sit with yourself. You learned to avoid your own feelings. And you had to so you could protect yourself, to avoid your own pain, to avoid that aching sense that maybe you weren't really lovable. And self-abandonment will lead you into all kinds of painful and chaotic and inappropriate situations, because as long as you're focused on someone else, you don't have to be with yourself. So you have a really good reason to keep your focus externalized. Maybe you're listening to this video and you're thinking, well, that doesn't really make sense, because if I was the problem, then I would just fix myself. But fixing yourself really is the start and end of this problem you're stuck in. Unfortunately, it's also the hardest step. And it's one we try to dodge for as long as possible. And I know this because I know this step intimately. Because for many, many years, I buried it under intense relationships, endless shopping, and endless distractions. But underneath every self-destructive behavior I had was a deep lack of love and disapproval for myself. I didn't even know where to start loving myself because I'd convinced myself that every problem that ever walked itself into my life was coming from out there somewhere, and it had nothing to do with me. I didn't have a hand in it, certainly. And this gets us back to your current situation. If you keep going back to a relationship you know isn't good for you, or that you know has no chance of succeeding, at some point you have to ask, is it really this person I'm afraid of losing? Or is it just easier than sitting with myself and my own lack of love? And all because when you were little, at a time when you were supposed to get love and attention and warmth, well, you didn't. And since you were too young to make sense of that, you blamed yourself. What else could you do? You coped the best way you could. But you also, in the process, assumed, I must not be lovable. I must not be worth listening to or matter enough. I must not be interesting enough for my caregivers or my parents to spend time with me, to pay attention to me. And even if you're successful now, even if you walk through the world looking like you've got it all together, those early messages, they don't go away. In fact, those early messages get imprinted into you at the physical level. At the physical level. They live under the surface and they quietly shape all of your expectations and your experiences throughout your whole life. And when you don't love yourself, when you're not treating yourself with gentleness and compassion, of course you'll cling to crumbs of affection from other people. Of course you have to settle. Because a part of you still believes this is all I get, it's all I'm worth, and I might as well settle for it. I might as well take this crap relationship because nothing better is coming. And if you stay in that pattern long enough, yeah, eventually that's all you'll ever believe. Let's talk for a moment about the actual cost of letting go, because every day you spend holding on to a relationship that's essentially already over and fantasizing about all the things that could have been, replaying conversations in your mind over and over again, wondering if this person was the one or thinking that they were the only person you could have a good relationship with. Every day you waste in this way is a day you're not present for your own life, the way it is in this moment. Because what you're stuck in right now isn't a real relationship. If it was, it would be working and functional. And you wouldn't have to watch this video at all. And you're not exactly single either. So you're not available to have relationships with new people who might be better suited to you. You're emotionally just locked, frozen in a place between two worlds. You're tethered to a person who isn't showing up for you or isn't right for you, but you're also unavailable to someone who might be right for you. This emotional limbo where you're grieving something that's already gone, it can become your identity eventually if you stay in it long enough. And the longer you sit in that story and you marinate in it and keep replaying old memories, and old what could have beens, what could we be if we got back together, the harder it becomes to imagine a different story, a better one. And I mean, if the relationship is already over and it's just you and your lingering hope, then you're holding on to an imaginary bond, to something that maybe felt real once and beautiful perhaps, maybe even, but it no longer exists in this present moment. And so by default, you have to let it go just on account of it not being real. Because the more of your emotional resources you spend, you invest in that fantasy, the more time you lose with people who could actually love you now. I know letting go isn't easy. In fact, it's the hardest part. All the bargaining that you've done up to this point, the justifications, the mental gymnastics that you've had to run through to keep going back, the maybe if I just, that all happens before you reach this point when you just let it go. Just let it go. Because letting go is the moment that you stop trying to change the story and you finally just accept that it's already ended. But wait, because this is the best part. Acceptance is actually the doorway to freedom. Everything you want, peace, clarity, the chance to be loved by somebody else, the chance to build something with someone else that might be your future, all of that is on the other side of this door. You just have to grab your bags and walk through it. Just be brave enough and walk straight through. You might still feel attached to your ex. That ache, that longing, it doesn't disappear overnight. But it doesn't mean your actions have to match your unconscious drives. All it means is that some part of you still believes an old story about your own unworthiness, but you can change that. And every time you don't go back, every time you make a different choice, you're writing a new one. You're writing new possibilities. And if you find this kind of content helpful, consider subscribing. In the meanwhile, go ahead and watch these other videos on why we get involved in toxic relationships, what it has to do with our own trauma, and how we can take control and stop living in this unconscious way.